All right, so now we bring chapters 4 and 5 together on the supply and demand graph, and you can see we have one graph here, basic supply and demand curve. The price always goes on the left, and the quantity always goes on the bottom still. Always, every year, have one or two students that get that turned around, and it totally messes everything up. You can't switch those two around. But we have the supply curve, which always slopes from the bottom left up to the top right, and the demand curve, which always goes from the top left to the bottom right. Where those two lines cross, that is what we call the equilibrium, and we usually label that E1 for the first equilibrium point. And then here in a little bit, we're going to start moving supply and demand curves, and the new equilibrium point we would label E2. All right, so excuse me. Here we have another supply and demand curve that I have drawn, and to figure out the price and quantity is pretty simple. Where the supply and demand curve cross, where the equilibrium point is, you simply go straight across to get the price, and here we'll call that, we'll estimate it at $7. So the equilibrium price, or what we call the market clearing price, is $7 in this situation. And you need to know that equilibrium, market clearing mean the exact same thing. And then as we go down, that will tell you the quantity of the product that are going to be bought and sold. The quantity, or the market clearing quantity, would be, in this situation, 6,000. So that's pretty simple. Just where those two lines cross, you go across for the price, and you go down for the quantity. And that tells you, in a free market economy, what the price is going to be and what the quantity is going to be of a product being sold. Now, when we talk about free market, just to refresh your memory, we're talking about products that there are lots of them, there are lots of buyers, there are lots of sellers, and all of the products are identical. Some classic examples of this are the stock market, which we haven't talked about yet, but a stock of Disney, it doesn't matter who you buy it from, that stock of Disney is the exact same. Whereas an example of not a free market economy would be a cheeseburger, because a cheeseburger at McDonald's does not taste the same as a cheeseburger at, say, White Castle or at Louis or any other restaurant that you might think of. So some other examples are truck driving services. A semi-truck driver is generally considered a perfect market, or a perfectly free market product. You're restricted by the miles per hour, so every truck driver can get it there in the same amount of time. There's not a difference in quality of the products being delivered, and there are thousands of sellers and there are thousands of buyers for that product. So those are two classic examples of a perfect market. Okay, so you can see here that there has been an increase in demand, because we see that by going from D1 to D2. In some situations, you will see where they go from D to D1. Either way is fine. It doesn't really matter how you label it, as long as you clearly label what the first curve was and what the second curve was. So in this situation, we've gone from E1, equilibrium 1, to equilibrium 2. So our new price, all right, right there would be $8.50. Our new quantity would be 7,000, all right, and our equilibrium has certainly shifted up and to the right. We call this an increase in demand and an increase in quantity supplied. We increase the demand because the curve is moving, and we increase the quantity supplied because we are moving along the supply curve, and the supply is increasing. So this is an increase in demand and an increase in quantity supplied. All right, here we have a surplus drawn, and what you see up at the very top is where, with the red line, where the government has stepped in. Typically the government, not always, but typically the government has stepped in and said, this equilibrium price and quantity is not what's good for the people of the country, or we would benefit from some outside force having the price be at a higher level than what the equilibrium price is, or what the natural market would bear, which in this situation would be $7 and 6,000 being purchased. And the most common example of this is minimum wage. And right now, and we see this in today's society, you guys as high school students are our minimum wage workers for the most part, and very few of you are working at minimum wage. Minimum wage is $7.25 an hour right now, and if I was to go around the room and ask for a survey of how many of you worked at $7.25 an hour, very few of you would give me that amount. You would say a higher amount. Now, some of you may say, "Oh, I work for $2.15 at Steak and Shake or whatever." Well, that's fine, you do, but with your tips, you are certainly making well above $7.25 an hour, typically. So in this situation, if there are some people out there, and quite a few people in the world, that would like to see minimum wage raised to $9 an hour, and this goes for lots of politicians. Well, if we look at the supply and demand curve, and the supply and demand curve, if you graph things correctly, will always lead you to the truth, all right? And in this situation, if they were to raise minimum wage to $9 an hour, we would see these two very important points right here, where the $9 line crosses the demand curve and where the $9 line passes the supply curve. So at a rate of $9 an hour, a lot of business owners are going to lay people off, or they're not going to replace an employee maybe that goes off to college, or maybe they're going to cut back on your hours, right? So as a result, we're going to see the minimum wage employers, all right, the McDonald's, the Steak and Shakes, the places at the mall are going to hire 4,000 people, all right, at $9 an hour. They're all going to have to cut back. But more of you are going to want to go to work. You're like, at $7.25, you're like, yeah, I'll just work on my grades, or I'll just hang out with my friends. But at $9 an hour, you're like, oh, yeah, I'll go to work. I want to work. I want more hours. Maybe your logic, right? I only work 10 hours, but at $9 an hour, I'll work more hours. I don't work. Ooh, I'd like to go to work. So the supply of labor is going to be at 7,500. So we see over here to the right, the supply is at 7,500, and again, we got that by where the $9 line crosses the supply curve, and we go straight down, and we see our supply would be 7,500, whereas our demand would be 4,000, all right? And again, we get that by where the $9 line, and we drop that straight down, and I'm saying that's 4,000. So our supply is 7,500, our demand is 4,000, so this means we would have a surplus of 3,500 workers. So in other words, we have 3,500 people that want to go to work, that are willing to work for $9 an hour, but they can't find a job. So we say that that is a surplus of labor. Now, the last thing I have down here is that a binding, and this is called a price floor. I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about that. This line up here is called a floor because you can't go below it. Just like the floor you're standing on, you can't go below that floor. The price wants to go here, but this line that has been set by the government in this situation is keeping it from happening. So we call that a price floor. And if it's above the equilibrium, and if it's having an effect on the economy, we say that it is a binding price floor. All right? If I was to take this line and move it down here and say, ooh, you can't go below $5 an hour, right? Minimum wage is $5 an hour. It would have no impact on our economy because the equilibrium wage is 7.25 anyway. All right, that's where the market wants to go. So in this situation where the line's up here, we say that is a binding price floor. If the line was below the equilibrium, we would say that would be a non-binding price floor.